known as YSO. I've had the pleasure of working with these Dynamo women on putting together this lecture series, and they've really done a fantastic job lining up a group of 4 really incredible speakers for us this semester, so thank you so much. I'd also like to thank the sponsors of the lecture series for their support. So in addition to the School of Architecture. Hold on, let me see if I can advance this here. Yeah. Spacebar. Technical difficulties. Okay, so in addition to the School of Architecture, we've had support from Ryan Companies, from HGA, from Collage Architects, from MSR Design, BWBR, LHB, and then also they received a grant from the Women's Center the Women's Center Gender Equity Grant, which also lent their support to this series. So that enabled us to invite these incredible lecturers, also have 2 panel discussions, and all the wonderful swag you also see outside. So I also wanted to make sure that for those of you who are associated with AIA, that you know that this lecture is registered for continuing education credits, so please be sure to register for the session by recording your AIA member number on the sign-in sheet outside. Yeah, so that should, all of you who need those things are probably familiar with all of that, so we don't need to linger up there for too long. And I have the pleasure of passing it over to Amelia and Neva.
Thank you. All right, thank you all for being here. My name is Amelia Rosenbusch, and I'm a graduate student here at the University of Minnesota and an organizer with YSO, like Jennifer said, the Women in Architecture Student Organization. Our lecture series this fall is asking our community to make space for an extended canon, equity in the profession, and designing a more just environment. Make space for a diversity of ideas, for radical positions in architectural thought, and for considering the full range of possibilities in design. Make space for architecture to more clearly reflect the society in which we live in. We look forward to welcoming these expanded dialogues to the College of Design here at the University of Minnesota.
Hi, my name is Neva. I'm also a graduate student here at the College of Design. So tonight our speaker is Tamara Eaglebull, FAIA, NCARB, AICAE. Tamara is the co-founder of Encompass Architects PC, a national firm headquartered in Lincoln, Nebraska. She is an enrolled member of the Oglala Lakota Nation, and her family is from Pine Ridge, South Dakota. She's recognized as the first Native American woman to be licensed in the United States. Tamara received her Bachelor of Science in Design Architectural Studies from Arizona State University and a Master of Architecture from the University of Minnesota here in Minneapolis, so it's great to have her back. Tamara is also the 2018 recipient of the Whitney M. Young Jr. Award of the AIA. The National Award distinguishes an architect that embodies social responsibility and actively addresses a relevant issue. So please join us in welcoming Tamara.
How do I advance it?
You have to just click this.
Click it, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. If I cough, sorry, I'm kind of fighting a cold here. So my story started long before I was born, in the 1950s in a small town on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. I'm gonna go back one. Actually, I need to, sorry. One of our tribal leaders told his 2 teenage boys that one day our community would have the means to improve the community. And at that time, our tribe would need lawyers and would need architects. So he encouraged his boys, who were high school aged at that time, to pursue those professions. Now, this was the 1950s in South Dakota, and so it was very racist, and they went to their counselor at their high school, who was a non-native person, and this counselor told them that they could not pursue those careers because at that time, Native American men could not even hope to be a professional. So he encouraged them to pursue degrees in teaching. He said, that's the best you can do is to be a teacher. So they went on to pursue their teaching degrees and both had long careers in education and in tribal education. But one of those boys was my dad, and he always regretted not going into architecture. It was what he wanted to do. It was what he definitely had the skills to pursue that. He was able in his career, in his long career in education, to eventually start working for the governmental agency which helped Native students pursue college education by helping them get grants and funding and also get admission to colleges. So he was able to help students pursue their dreams. He also was instrumental in writing legislation that helped tribes be able to contract architects and contractors directly for any new building. And this was key because up until this point, which the act didn't become in practice until the 90s, up until this point, the government was solely in charge of building any new school, detention facility, housing, anything like that on tribes. The tribes did not have a way to contract that themselves and thus have a say in their built environment. So my dad talked to me from a very young age about architecture and the disparity between where I grew up. I grew up in Aberdeen, South Dakota, which is off the reservation. It's a non-native community, but there were a lot of natives there because it was also the headquarters of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Indian Health Services. My family lived on Pine Ridge, which is a tribal community. There was a big disparity between the school I went to and the school my cousins went to, the house I lived in, the house my grandparents lived in. And my dad would talk to me a lot about that and why that was the way it was. And so he was the one who really encouraged me to be an architect and showed me that architecture was a way that I could come back and help my people, but also across the country. One of the things that is interesting that in the history of Native American architecture, and there's been a lot written about it, especially contemporary architecture in Native America recently. There are several books out, but all of those books except for this one, Our Voices, are written by non-Native people. So Our Voices is the first book about indigenous architecture written by indigenous architects. It's available on Amazon. It's a collection of essays written by indigenous architects from all over the world. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the US here. So I have a chapter in there, and it's just basically we were asked to write an essay on whatever we wanted. So it's a really interesting collection, and there's volume 2 is in the works right now. They're both available on, this first one's available on Amazon, the next one will be coming out soon. So in Native America right now, we call it Indian country, there are a lot of issues that they struggle with every day, and up until recently, I think that the built environment has been something that has kind of been not really ignored, but it's just kind of been there. It's been functional. It's been something that they don't really think about. It's all these things that they have to deal with on a daily basis kind of take all the time and all the effort and all the thinking and all the funding and stuff goes towards it, but there hasn't. Is that me? There hasn't been a recognition that the built environment can influence all these things and can have a big effect on these issues. Because, the issue of, say, tribal safety, there's a lot to do with how we used to design our communities when we were actively having warfare against other tribes and also during colonization that could influence and could have a say in how we approach safety now. So those kind of things haven't really been thought of yet, and that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of what I'm trying to do with my work and my outreach to tribes, and trying to let them think about how the built environment and how we design the built environment, and how we can go back to our cultural identity and how that can help us as our culture grows and culture moves forward. So sovereignty is a concept that we talk about a lot in Indian country, and it's something that we apply to all these other issues. We have taken control over our government. We run our own political systems. We're trying to run our own healthcare and police force and all this. And I'm proposing that we do what my dad has started and take control of our built environment and the design of our built environment. A lot of these slides that I show you are my work, but also work by other Native American architects who are members of the AICAE, which is a group that we have that is for Native Americans who are architects, engineers, planners, interior designers. So we have an organization that we get together and we try to pursue these issues and also lobby the government on different issues. So cultural identity is something that I think the tribes have done a good job of keeping our cultural identity in terms of the dances and the regalia and the artwork that you see now has been there for millennia. It's been there since the beginning of time, and those things have evolved and those things have changed, and that's how our cultures have still survived. And one thing to recognize is that when I say Native Americans and when I say Indian country, I'm being very, very, very general. In the United States right now, there are over 570 individually recognized tribal nations. They all have different languages, all have different cultures. So, and each of those cultures has survived, and each of those cultures has grown and will be here well into the future because, the language has survived, the arts have survived, and that's something that we, the Native people really, have held on to, that, our material culture of our art and artwork is what we use to identify who we are to the outside world. What we're not so good, I think, at showing people is that our built environment is something that should also say something to the outside world. There's this movement in Canada. I was up there last year, 2 years ago, and I was really surprised to see that even though I was at an architects conference that had nothing to do with with their First Nations cultures up there, they started the meetings all off talking about and thanking the First Nations lands that they were on and recognizing that where we were meeting was originally First Nations land. And then I went to another meeting on the other side of Canada, and they did the same thing. And so there's this kind of countrywide recognition of wherever they are, it was not their original land, it was First Nations land. And I think that's something that we're missing here in America, this underlying recognition that wherever you are standing in America, it was originally Indigenous land. And approaching projects from that standpoint, I think, can have a big influence on how we do those projects and how we approach the design of those projects and the representation of the culture. So the cultural identity is something that I think should extend to our built environment. It's something that used to really have a big say in who we were. When people came upon these different communities, they knew who lived there just by the houses. They knew who lived there just by the structures. And those structures were unique to that particular climate, that particular culture, that those people's lifestyle, those people's way of, if they were hunters, if they followed the buffalo, if they were farmers. It also had said a lot about what their security issues were, if they were always under attack, or if they didn't have that issue. That's how the structures were designed. And that's something that I think was unique, and that was, I think at that time, back in the old days, that was the prime example of cultural identity. But now, that's been lost, and this is what you see when you go to these tribal communities. And looking at these pictures, you can't tell where that's at. If that's South Dakota, if that's Oklahoma, if that's Washington State, you don't know, because there's that big loss of identity, cultural identity in their structures. And with things, all those issues that we're dealing with in tribal communities, this hasn't really been thought of yet. And so, this is the norm. This is what people, tend to think is okay. And when I go out to tribal communities, and I talking to them about a new building, most of the time they're like, well, we don't want to worry about design. We don't want to pay for design. We just need, just give us a pole barn. That's all we need. Because they're so focused on just survival and just, getting by, that they haven't really made the switch yet to, that these structures and this can have a big influence on how others perceive us and perceive these tribal communities. There are a lot of issues that tribes deal with, and those are things I think that they have to focus on over just, they see design as being extra, as being kind of a luxury, as being something that they shouldn't really have to worry about, and they don't want to pay for it. And these issues, these infrastructure issues are big hurdles that we have in Indian country. I heard a statistic the other day that on the Navajo Nation, which is down in Arizona, New Mexico, it's an area that encompasses the same size as Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. They have 13 grocery stores there. So, a lot of these communities are dealing with this food desert and, these food inequity issues, and having communities that are safe and that represent who the people are will therefore lead to having communities that can prosper and can support businesses. Because the main I think, hurdle that they have right now is these tribal communities are not safe. Businesses don't really thrive there and don't really, I think I keep touching the, don't really survive and don't really thrive because of the, there's a lot of vandalism, there's a lot of crime that happen to these buildings, and my theory is that it's because the people don't really have a lot of ownership in these facilities, and because they're not involved in the design of them, and they're not really consulted in the design and in the construction of these facilities. So what happens is this disconnect between who we are and how we see ourselves as Native people and how we are portrayed to the outside world. And that's happening because, what's out there in media and movies and just perception is how other people define us. And, largely that hasn't been very positive, that hasn't been very accurate. And it's, this self-imposed identity, or this lack of self-imposed identity that really, I think, overshadows everything that we are trying to do in Indian country. And, when people hear the word Indian or Native American, they do think of this generalized view and this generalized idea of who we are, not understanding that, there are 570 some different tribes. That happens in architecture too. These are extreme views and versions of, what passes as Native American architecture these days, but, there are a lot of modern examples of this that I don't show because I don't want to offend the modern day architects who are doing it. But this idea that when someone's doing architecture for Native America, you have to start with the teepee. And not understanding that, all these pictures that I'm showing are in the Southwest, where the teepee was not used, was not a traditional form there at all. So, having this imposed identity on who we are also is happening with our architecture. And what we're trying to do with modern contemporary Native American architecture is change that view, is to show that our architecture should be an expression of who we are as people. And so Native American architects right now are trying to take back this, the control of our architectural identity. And ideally, architecture in Indian country should be done by Native American architects. The reality is there's maybe 20 of us in the country. So there may be another 10 or 20 who are in the country but don't practice in in Native American architecture. They might be mainstream architects who don't really connect with their community or don't identify that way. So this isn't about me saying that if it's a Native project, only Native architects can do it, because that's just not realistic. But what we are saying is that there is a idea of authorship and authenticity that needs to be recognized, and this is something that, as architects and as future architects that you guys are, we need to understand that with Native Americans, this is an extremely important example in doing projects in Native America. Isn't just because you think you're going to win an award because there's this amazing culture that you can draw upon. It's because you should be doing that work because there's a really good opportunity there to help this culture express their identity and be authentic in who they are. And the way to do that is to work really closely with the people. If you work with a Native architect, great, but as an architect going into a tribal community, I always encourage them to work really, really closely with the people. And that's kind of opposite to how architects typically work in mainstream America. When we do work in mainstream America, it's a very small group that you're working with because they want to streamline the decision making and make sure that the project's done in a very efficient and timely fashion. The opposite kind of needs to happen in Indian communities because you need to make sure that you allow enough time to involve the whole community. Whether it's a school or a gas station, grocery store, the whole community is going to be interested in it because these projects are very, very few and far between. When a community gets a new school, it's a lifetime project for them. They might not get another new school for 60, 70 years. So it really means a lot to this community. And so people will show up to meetings whether they have a kid at that school or not. And same thing with the gas station. It affects the whole community. So having this intensive process where you allow people to come and be a part of it is integral and is very, very important to doing projects in Native America. And it's something I think that as architects, we're a little afraid of that because we tend to be, a little, protecting our work and not letting people see what we're doing. And we want to have this process where we're in control, we're the creative ones, we have the answers. And you have to kind of flip that way of thinking when you go to tribes. You have to be very, very selfless and let them come up with the ideas. Let them have their say. They're the experts in their culture. You can do all the research you want on them, but they're the ones who get to make that decision and who have the knowledge and the final say on what should be used and shouldn't be used. So this concept of sovereignty is something that I think tribal people need to start applying to our built environment. And that's the only way that our communities are going to start to reflect who we are as cultures. And when people come to our communities, if they come for meetings or conferences, come to the casinos or whatever, they need to be able to see who we are. And that story needs to be told by the tribal people, not by someone's interpretation of who we are. And recognizing this idea of tribal sovereignty, what that means in a day-to-day relationship to non-Native people is there's an equal relationship there between the state government and these tribal governments. It's an equal relationship. So right now, when a governor comes to a tribal community, they're going to a building that doesn't, it's not on the same par as the state government building. And so, communities need to start to approach our built environment in that way so that we understand that our buildings say a lot about who we are, and that if we want people to take us seriously and give us the respect that we deserve as a tribal nation, as a sovereign nation, that the first impression of that is our built environment and our buildings. So having the understanding that Native people need to define their own culture. That's number one. Having this understanding that every project, whether it's on Native land or not, was Native land originally, is two. And then understanding that these cultures are not target markets. If you go to a lot of the big firms who do Native work, on their website, it'll have market segments: education, Native America, schools, it'll be a listing of that. And we're trying to get across to architects that, going to tribal communities needs to be something that you have an interest in more than winning an award. When I started the firm in 2002, I had already been working for 16 years in the architecture world, and I did that purposefully because I wanted to make sure that I knew enough so that when I started my own firm, I was able to do any project. Because of the lack of Native architects, a lot of Native architects make the mistake of putting out their shingle, starting their own firm right out of school. And that really limits them on what they can do. So there are a lot of, when I was coming out of school, there were a lot of Native firms who were one-person shops, two-person shops, and they were limited to the small projects, small housing projects, small, under $1 million kind of projects. I wanted to make sure that I could do any project that a tribe needed, any size, any type. So I didn't focus or become an expert in any one project type. I used those 16 years to get a variety of experience to kind of do every project that I could. And when I felt like I knew enough, and also when an opportunity came up that we were going to start the firm, I went around to the tribes that I thought we would, be able to do work with, and introduced the firm and introduced myself and kind of talked to them about what I was trying to do with the company. And mostly, though, I would listen. I would ask them, have you guys done buildings in the past? And a lot of them had really beautiful, new buildings. That's great. How do you like that building? How does it work for you? What was your experience like with that architect? And a lot of them, a big majority said, well, it's all right. We don't really use it, though. Or, it looks okay, but, it's not really what we wanted. I don't know what that's supposed to be. I think they said it was supposed to be an eagle. Just this disconnect from these buildings. And they would say, the architect didn't really listen to us. The architect was more concerned with winning an award. And so when I'd look up those buildings, yes, they were all, most of them were award winners. Architects love awards. That's our thing. And So when we started, I came back from, I went on this kind of tour, and I was gone, from the office for weeks. I came back and talked to my partner, and I told him, kind of what I discovered. And so when we set out our core values of our company, one of our main core values is we do not pursue awards. We do not pursue project awards. And that was so that we made sure that our focus was going to be on what the client wanted, not on what we thought would win an award, not what we thought would be, the best thing that we could, submit on. And that also let our clients know that we don't have any other, ulterior motive on these projects, that, whatever they say goes. And so that's something that, I don't know if it'll ever come across in architecture, but I always propose whenever I meet somebody from National AIA Awards committees is I think very strongly that client satisfaction should be a rating on awards. Because if your client's not happy, I don't think it should be an award-winning project. So I wanted to talk a little bit about one project here that we did. This is Pahasinti Oawea is a porcupine school, that means in Lakota. It's on the Porcupine Indian Reservation, which is Porcupine community on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, which is where my family's from. Porcupine is a district. There's 7 districts in this community, and this is where my mom grew up, where her extended family is, where my mom lives now, where I spent all my summers and time with my extended family. There's a lot of issues there. Pine Ridge is kind of notoriously known as being one of the poorest communities in the country. Kind of, every time a survey comes out, they're always on it. When we were asked to come out and do the school, people were like, yeah, you should be able to design it fast because you're from there. And I said, no, that's not how I work. Even though this is my community and this is my culture, I was raised in my culture. I tried my best to go into this project without any preconceived ideas. And the first meeting that we went to, the school leadership and the tribal leadership thought I would come in with the design and show them. And we just showed up, and we were like, no, we're here to listen. We're here to hear what you guys want and hear what you guys need. And they're like, well, you guys are the experts. You guys are going to tell us what we need. We're like, no, you guys are the experts. You guys, this is your school. These are your kids. This is your curriculum. Let's just talk it through. And so we don't draw anything at all until after we've had several meetings with our clients, because we feel like it's very, presumptuous of us to go in and say, here's what you need. Here's the solution to your problem, when we don't understand what that problem is or understand what those needs are. So the first thing we did was we have what we call cultural values workshops, where we invite everybody. We invite, it's an open meeting. We put it on the radio and the newspaper, all over, invite anybody to come. And we have several of these throughout the first few weeks of the project. And this one was interesting because we knew that in order to get the parents at this meeting, and these are the ones we were kind of focusing on, we're like, we really need to get parents to come to this meeting. So we said, well, the only way we're going to get them there is if we provide daycare, if we provide childcare for their kids so they can bring their kids. So I brought my staff, and we all went up there, and we had a room set aside in their existing school. And I said, just take all the kids there and just keep them busy while I work with the parents. So my staff was in there with the kids, and the kids wanted to participate in this. And so they were asking my staff, like, I was just like, just have them draw whatever, just keep them busy. Well, they were like telling my staff, like, well, here's what I want in this school. And so my staff was astute enough to kind of, understand that these kids were wanting to be involved. These kids were really wanting to be part of this process. So they started asking them questions similar to what I was asking their parents and the teachers. And when we got back to the office, the next day, and we were kind of looking at all the things we got, the stuff we got from the kids turned out to be the most valuable stuff of anything. And, because the parents were really focused on kind of the pragmatic issues. I want to make sure that when I drive up that this happens. I want to make sure that the classrooms have this. And they were very concerned about those kind of nuts and bolts kind of things. The kids, on the other hand, they were able to think very esoterically and be able to think, kind of in these big concepts. And, they could care less about, how many classrooms there were. They were wanting to, talk about how they felt in the building. And so one of the things that what came out of it was we kept seeing this word safe. We kept seeing this word house. And we went back and we had another meeting with the kids and asked them to kind of drill down on that. What does it mean when you say you want the school to be a safe place? Now, this was in 2005, so it was kind of before all the, school shooting issues that we have today. So that really wasn't a big, kind of a known thing. So we knew it wasn't that. We knew it wasn't, safe from school shooters. And, looking back at, those statistics that I showed you about, the incidences of alcoholism and all this stuff, it became obvious that the home life of these kids, and these are K through 8, that these kids came to school because it was their safe place. Their homes weren't safe. The school was a place where they came to, have, it might be their only meal of the day. It might be their only positive interaction with an adult of the day. It might be the place in the winter where there's heat. A lot of these kids live in this substandard housing where, in the wintertime, 60% of them lack heat. So, we were seeing kids come to school in, there was this one little boy who came to school in his grandpa's shoes because he didn't have shoes. But school meant enough to him and was so important to him that that's what he did. And, it's totally different from, my children, who they have a great home life, so they hate school. It's like every morning is was a battle to get them to go to school. These kids, it was the opposite. They would do anything. Walk, in the snow, walk to catch that bus to get to school because it was their safe place. So talking to them about, what would make them feel safe, because their existing school was not great. Their existing school was like a 1950s building that was really in bad shape. It had most of the times the plumbing didn't work and stuff like that, but that didn't matter to them. They preferred to be there versus their house. So we asked them, what does it mean? What is a safe place to you? And they would say, a house. But they weren't talking about their house. They were talking about this idealized house that they had that they saw on TV, like a sitcom house where the family was all happy. The family, would gather in the kitchen. The family would gather in the living room, and they would have this, they would eat together, and they would have this great time as a family in this house. And so we asked them to tell us what that experience was like. What would happen when you got to that house? Well, we get home, we walk in the door, we hang up our backpack, we wash our hands, and then we go into the living room and we sit as a family and we talk. And we play games and we hang out as a family. I'm like, okay, how can we do that as architects? How can we do that in the school? So we talked to the teachers. How do we make this school be a house for them? How do we make this school represent that safety to them? So in talking to the teachers, their main concern was that the school would be overwhelming for the kids because it was going to be so much bigger than what they were used to. So they wanted to do this idea of the pod system where we break the grades up into these 3 pods. I'm like, okay, that's a start because it's giving each of those grades a home and breaking it down to a smaller scale. But now within the pod, what do we do to make it seem like a house? And so we came up with this idea of the Wosampe Tipi, which means learning house in Lakota. And once we had that idea of creating each of these pods as a house, it helped us go through this procession of creating, what happens inside that pod, so that in the line drawing there, hopefully you can see it, but the procession is when they walk into this house, and each house has a physical door. It's not like you just walk down the hallway and you wander into this house. There's a physical door, so you physically go into this learning pod, and when you go in, there's a place to hang up the backpacks, and then there's the bathrooms, so they wash their hands, and then everybody gathers in this gathering spot, which we call the Tioshbaye gathering. Tioshbaye is another Lakota word, which means extended family. It's the core of our social system. Everything revolves around this extended family. And like in Lakota way, we don't have things such as great aunt, great uncle, second cousin twice removed or anything like that. It's everybody's an aunt, uncle, cousin, grandma, grandpa. And so, growing up, I had 10 grandmas and grandpas. I couldn't understand why my friends who are non-Indian only had 4. I was like, I have probably 100 cousins, so it's like, I don't know how they're related, but I just know they're cousins, so that's how this community is. And so we created this space where this Tioshbaye of the pod could gather every morning. And this was a big deal because most of the projects, and especially schools, are funded by the US government. The US government has very, very stringent programmatic rules. If you have this many students, you times that by this amount of square footage per student, that tells you how much classroom space you got. And then based on that enrollment, you get this many classrooms, and it's very prescriptive. And so they don't allow anything, even though they do tribal schools, they don't allow anything extra culturally. There's no extra cultural classrooms, any extra square footage for anything like that. So getting this space in there, which was essentially a flexible classroom, was kind of a big deal for us and them, and the BIA, because they, was the first time they kind of allowed something like this in a recognition of this need to, be responsive to what the client needed. So we kind of, shaved space out of all these other classrooms and made this Tioshbaye gathering space, which is a space now. Every morning they gather. They start their day out here as a teepee, and then they do their day, and then they gather here before they leave. And so it's this recognition that this is what the students needed. And the teachers say that they've noticed that the kids are so happy, and they look forward to this the time together as a Tioshbaye. The other thing that is a strong cultural value is this idea of the wopula, which means thanks. So Wampilatanka means like the big thanks. And it's a event that we have when to honor people and to thank people for, as a community, like if someone does something for your family, you have a wopula for them, which always revolves around food. You have a big feed, and then you give them a blanket, a star quilt, which is one of our kind of contemporary crafts that really reflects who we are, both as people, but also it's kind of been, it's evolving as a craft. So we decided to use this idea of the star quilt in the flooring of the dining area. So this school, and most schools on tribal reservations, also have to function as the community centers, because there's not any community centers on these places. So elections happen here, wakes and funerals happen here, birthday parties, stuff like that, all happens in this school. So it has to be super durable, but it also has to function, for those events and school. So everything, all the feeding and all the wopulas happen here. So that we thought that was a very appropriate imagery to use in this dining area. And that picture there is the star quilts that they gave to the building team when we opened the school. Talking to the kids, we talked to them throughout the process, and one of the times we went when we wanted to talk about the media center. What did the media center mean to them? And they said, well, I like to use books because that's how I can dream about places that I know I'll never see. So we decided to take the idea of dreaming, a place for dreaming, and what does the dream mean in Lakota? It's the dream catcher. So we use that as in the as the layout for the lighting system here. And it turned this media center into a place where they want to be. Like their existing library in their school that they had before this was like this sad little room with like 20 books, and no one wanted to go there. And now everybody wants to go here, and it's this highlight of their day to come to the media center. One of the other things, and this goes back to what the teacher's concern was, that the school was going to be so big. And our site was a sloping site, so it was a 2-level school, which is really hard to do, and try to keep everybody understanding where they are, not get lost. So from the outside, we wanted to make sure that the kids all could, when they looked back at the school, and in this community, you can see the school from kind of everywhere. This is in the Black Hills, so there's all these bluffs. And we wanted to, when the kids were outside the school or at their homes and they were looking back at the school, we wanted them to very clearly be able to say, that's my Wosumpik teepee there. And when next year when I get to the 3rd grade, I'll be moving to that one, and be able to identify where they were. And so we asked the little guys, the K through 2 age kids, draw us a school. And they all drew some version of this little red schoolhouse. And so we decided, for that pod, we would use red brick. And then as we got through the older pods, we used yellow for the middle grades, and then purple. We got a little bit more sophisticated with the color palette, and this carried through to the inside too. Like the older kids, they really like these vibrant colors of purple and lime green and stuff like that. So those were the kind of the interior colors too for that pod. For the little guys, it was very primary colors because that's really kind of what they would identify with. A big thing with these tribal schools now is the resurgence of our languages, trying to teach our kids the language and make sure that carries on. Unfortunately, there's a lot of cultures where that has died out, and they might have just a handful of tribal speakers. So in all the projects we do all the signage in the language. The turquoise one there, that's the actual entry into that teepee there, the doors. The teachers are very adamant about not having a manufactured play structure. They're like, we want our kids to regain this connection to land. In the old days, and then even when I was young, which is probably the old days to you guys, we knew the names of birds. We knew the names of bugs and animals, and we weren't afraid to be outside and have bugs. Like now when I sit outside and if a wasp comes around, my kids scatter, they run. And I'm like, that's not even, it's a bumblebee, or it's not even a bee that stings, it's not even a wasp that stings. And they don't know that. And kids are so focused on technology and being inside nowadays that the teachers are really seeing the fallout from that. So they were very adamant. We want a naturalized play environment. So we designed the exterior environment to be basically learning classrooms, exterior classrooms. And so you can see kind of the area outside those windows there. Each of the pods has a exterior classroom there that is accessed directly outside from that Teoshpaye gathering spot. That allows the teachers to take the learning outside anytime they want. We also that picture also shows, this is the K through 2 pod, which shows a storytelling circle. So they have elders and parents come in and have storytelling with the kids. So another way to connect culture to education. We did things for the older kids, like there's a pretty big slope on the site, and so what do kids like to do? Roll down the hill. So there's an area that they can roll down the hill, and so these areas where we're trying to teach the kids that it's okay to get dirty. It's even okay to scrape your knee. It's not the end of the world. And so trying to get them back connected to nature, which was a big cultural value that we had. So this has been opened now. It opened in 2008. And I like to show this project because this is, of my 30 years in the business, this is one where it's really come full circle for me and has been the most rewarding, because I went back there in 2018 with a documentary film crew they're doing a documentary on Native architects, and so we went to this school. And so now the kids who are there now, are not the kids we worked with, because those kids have aged out of the school. This is a whole new generation of kids here. And so I didn't think they would even know who I was or understand what we were there about, so I didn't even really try to involve the kids. But as we were going through, the kids would start to talk to the crew and the camera people, and they were telling them all these stories of the school. They were showing them, like, this is the place where it means, the teepee, this is where we Tioshbe, so they knew all these, big concepts of the school. And the film crew was like asking the teachers, like, did you guys prompt them? Did you tell them this? And the teachers were like, no. So somehow the process that we went through and these concepts that we got from the kids has become part of the institutional memory of these kids. So it was so rewarding to see that, what we did has had an effect. The practical effect that it had is this is one of the only buildings on this reservation that hasn't been vandalized in the 10 years that it's been open. On the inside, the kids kind of police each other. They won't let anybody, put their gum underneath the table or throw trash on the ground or, kick the wall. They're all very, very, they treat this school as if it's precious, and they treat this school as if it's their own, which, kind of proves one of my main points was that if we involve the people, they will take care of it and they will have ownership. And, the practical aspect of that then is the maintenance is easier, the repairs are less, and the school will last. These schools need to last 50 years. We try to design them for that, but unless they're maintained and unless they're taken care of, they won't. So it really kind of shows you that this concept of involving the community, and especially the children, because they're the ones who are going to be living there and our future leaders. The buffalo over there, that was interesting because there's a center space that we called the drum. I didn't show it on here, but there's this like 2-story space that connects the upper and lower levels, and it's a drum, and it's supposed to be a solar calendar. So there's an oculus that shines, and they haven't gotten the money yet to make the signs, but I was in there, and they had these there was an eagle, there's a horse, and this buffalo, and as I looked closer at them, one of the kids was telling me that they're like, well, this school is about sustainability because it's a LEED Silver school. And we know that that's part of that is not throwing a lot of trash away. So those are wrappers from their cereal bars that they have every morning. So the kids took it upon themselves to save all these wrappers from their breakfast and then use it to create, contemporary Native American art, which I thought was brilliant. So that was the kind of, this school to me is one of the most, I think, rewarding projects that I've done in my career. And it was really cute because when the first class graduated, they have kindergarten graduation there. So that's the picture on the lower right. I was the graduation speaker. It was fun. So this idea of cultural identity and what it means to be a Native person has evolved over the time, and that's the way our culture is going to survive. But it has to start to encompass the built environment. And that's the only way I think that we're going to get past the image that we have now, which is a result of colonization and what happened to us. And when things happen to you, you're kind of a victim, and I think that's where tribes are kind of stuck in this mentality of not having control and not feeling like they can have a say about our built environment. And as design professionals, we can have a lot to do with that by just merely asking them what they need, by just merely, giving them a say-so in their built environment and listening. And I think that's, kind of crucial to how our indigenous communities can move forward and start to be, true representations of our culture and, the history and the amazing past that we have. And, as architects, and I think as design professionals and artists do this too, is we try not to look into the past so much. We have to look 2 generations into the past, but we also have to look into the future. And so, one of the big sayings that you hear a lot is 7 generations, think 7 generations. And a lot of people think that's 7 generations into the future, but it's actually 3 generations in the past, year 1 generation, and 3 into the future. And that's the way that we can make sure that we don't become so focused on the past that we're doing teepee buildings, and we're doing eagle buildings and buffalo buildings, but that we're showing that this culture is contemporary, that we are, contemporary people, and we're going to be people here, well into the future. And so that our expressions, both in art and architecture, need to reflect that. Thank you. Can we take questions? Yeah, I have time to take questions if you want.
I have a question. So we talked a little bit about the cost. You're functional when you first come. So your sort of design process of listening and interacting with the community, that's potentially expensive. So how do you sort of navigate that?
What we do is and that's exactly what the clients will say to us is, we can't afford to have this really extensive design process. But what we found is if we take the time in schematics and do a really, really strong DD set, our CDs go a lot faster. So we've kind of flipped the percentages. Like typically you do 15, 20, 45% in those documents. We've flipped it, and so now basically we do like 25% in schematic. We do, I'm getting my math wrong here, but we do basically equal schematic and design development phases. And that allows us to do this really expedited CD phase. Because we create the story in that schematic phase, and that story allows us to have a basis to make those decisions on that we need to make in CDs. Because we always go back to what that story is of the building. Good question. Any others?
Thank you. That's very beautiful.
Thank you.
I thought that the fact that I forgot how long it's been since the school has been open, but if the children, through the children, I see it as the process of the restoration because they don't have that history. So Black Elk, before you showed the quote from Black Elk, I was thinking that this is the path for the repair and the restoration of the adult communities and reconnecting to both myth and institutions and growth of reestablishment of institutions, not by a retro process, but a reaching back and then going forward as you just characterized. So, it's a real good message. It's powerful, and it certainly resonated with me about the ways that what children can really offer. So in a way, it's the leadership of the future by the children. So that's also what education and all education is about. So what has happened in terms of what this school has represented in the broader restoration and grounding of a community to be able to go forward in other aspects, such as housing, such as maybe the government council buildings, and a strengthening and repair of the adult community that was a part of and that they participated in?
I think it's helped this community understand the value of architecture. They understand that, and this sounds very basic to, mainstream, but number one, they need an architect on every project, because up until now they weren't doing that. They were, let's just put a pole barn up, let's just do something fast, and we need it, and so we get it up there as fast as possible, as cheap as possible. And so this showed them, because what I should also say is that this project came in, on budget. It was actually a little bit less than budget with a point, I think it was like 0.01% change orders. So it was very, very efficient and very, it met all their goals of schedule and budget. It went through the review process of the BIA which usually takes years, it went through there in months. And so it was something that showed the tribe that this is possible, that this interactive design process is possible. What it's also done was, I was giving a talk at UNO in Omaha a few months ago, and it was to prospective college students, Native students who are going to hopefully go to college. And I talked about the school and you know, that we worked with the kids, and one kid raised his hand. So he's like high school age now. He's like, I was one of those kids. And now he's thinking about going into architecture. You know, so it had a big influence on, you know, what those kids can see as possibilities. I don't know if that's me.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and your work. To this idea, I really appreciate the clarification on 7 generations, that it's actually 3 generations back, 3 generations forward. And I'm thinking about your being a graduate of the University of Minnesota. I'm looking at all of the students that are out here and the practitioners, but mostly the students that are in the room right now. And assuming that one of the goals we might all share from different perspectives is to have more Native American architects, more indigenous people that are practicing architecture, but that practice of architecture means right now formal education, registration through a way of being in the world that may not be, well, I don't know, just whatever that is. What's 1 or 2 things that everyone in this room can do to support that as a goal? As a shared goal?
A shared goal of getting more Native students. I think just making it known is the biggest thing that I'm seeing. You know, I try to do a lot of outreach to the young kids, to like the kindergartners and the elementary school age kids, because you know, with the high school age kids, there's a huge kind of focus on STEM careers right now in Native America. And what our organization, the AICAE, is trying to do is change that to STEAM. So it includes architecture, because a lot of the grant agencies that give money to kids to go to school don't recognize architecture as a technical career. So that's some of the lobbying we're doing too on you know, for the older kids. But I think it's getting the word out there that architecture and the design professions are valuable, and that it does have an impact on the community. I think as Native kids, we're always, it's always a focus from our parents to do something to come back and help. There's a big feeling of responsibility there already. For me, I don't think I would have known that architecture was a viable way to do that, because you know, in my own head as a young kid, I thought I had to be a doctor or like a social worker or a lawyer in order to really go back and help my people, because I didn't really, you know, if my dad hadn't had this interest and had this knowledge, I wouldn't have known that architecture was a way to do it. So I think that's a big thing, is getting across to kids especially that architecture is a way to help people. It's not just designing a skyscraper, you know, because that's what they think architects do. Down here.
Thank you so much. That was very inspiring. At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned how when you were visiting Canada, there was always a land acknowledgement. And you just very eloquently described how architecture can be a kind of way to be an advocate. You don't have to be a doctor or a lawyer. I'm curious how you think that architecture could be a way to make a land acknowledgement, or that architecture could participate in the wider process, what in Canada they call the reconciliation. Apart from projects that take place on a reservation, what about projects that are not, but are still obviously within the colonial history, and how do you think architecture could participate in that as a practice?
One of the major things that I've seen that we try to do on our projects, but I've seen other Native architects also try to impart to their project process, is, in mainstream world, what's the big ceremony that we do when we're starting construction? Is the groundbreaking, right? So that process is very kind of a violent process of, going into the earth and disturbing the earth and claiming the earth. And the recognition that this earth meant something different to the people who were here before, and the way that we Native people traditionally think of the land is that it's a living thing. And so the idea of breaking it in such a violent way just has always struck me as like, oh God, that's just like, why do we do that? And so what we've started doing and what we encourage our clients to do is a blessing and a thanking that, you're thanking the earth for allowing that this project can be there, and that, recognition that you're doing something that's kind of violent to the earth, for the greater good. It's kind of the same thought of hunting, when Native Americans have hunted because it was subsistence. And whenever there was a kill, it was always, thanking for that animal for giving itself, to feed your family. Mainstream hunters don't do that. It's sport. So it's trying to flip that way of thinking, I think, about what the earth is. There's one up there.
Thank you so much, Gracious, for your presentation. I'm wondering if you approached other communities such as Navajo or Cherokee, North Carolina, or Oklahoma, or Florida, Seminole, and what sort of, did you find any resistance?
We work all over the country. We have projects in North Carolina, South Carolina. We haven't worked in Florida yet, but we do a lot of work in the Southwest too. So in terms of resistance, in terms of because I'm Lakota and they're, or what do you mean, or just in terms of resistance of, I'm trying to understand what you mean by what.
What's the question? Well, because you've got a Midwestern background.
Oh, yeah.
Do you find any resistance because of your culture? Basically, they have different values.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes we have, but when we talk to them and tell them that the approach is not, I'm not coming at this as an approach from a Lakota design approach. It's the approach of them being the drivers of the design, and that I'm here to kind of interpret things, I guess, that I'm not coming in and designing a Lakota building for them, but I'm taking their cultural values and trying to get at the heart of who they are as a culture. Then they have understood. So we've never really had any pushback. There is definitely that concern, but once we explain our process, we're accepted. That it? What one?
Hi, thanks again for the presentation. So you discussed that in past decades, everything on reservations were designed or quote unquote designed by government agencies. And now you briefly mentioned that there's a square footage requirement for classrooms, again, government prescribed. Are there modern hurdles that you have to overcome in regards to that? Is there something that needs to be change in that regard as well, would you say?
Yeah, it's the funding comes from the government, and it's because I don't want to go into the whole history, but because of the treaties that were made for the land, the U.S. government agreed to provide in perpetuity education, healthcare, housing. So part of their treaty obligations is to fund these schools and to fund education and also fund detention centers and hospitals and those kind of things. So, because the funding is coming through these agencies, these governmental agencies, we do have to comply with all the regulations and all the standards. Has to be, LEED Silver, has to have, ADA, all these things. So there is this, kind of negotiation that has to happen between what the tribe wants and what the tribe needs, and how that responds to these programmatic requirements that the government agency has. That's largely based on, non-native histories and precedents. So trying to get, do that negotiation, like in the school I showed you, the Teoshpaya gathering, that was something that had to, be a back and forth between us and the government, and, to try to convince them that this was a valuable space, and we had to put on our education programming hats and talk to them in that language of how it would benefit them, in an education-based way, even though we knew we were doing it for a cultural reason, So there is these kind of hurdles where we're trying to balance things, largely because that's where the funding's coming from now.